Iconic scene one, take one.
So in March of 2020, I was working as a resident front of house mixer for this local theater company. We were doing a pre-Broadway launch, and I got to work with sound designer Kai Harada, the front of house mixer for Wicked. It was the biggest step in my career so far. But with the local and government shutdowns, our opening night was also our closing night. In an instant, I had lost my job and my main source of income. So naturally, I took all my savings and made a movie. And I'm going to tell you all about it. Now, before we get started, I need you to hit that like button and subscribe and hit the notification bell for more on filmmaking and content creation. I run a video production company in South Florida, and I'm going to be documenting my experiences here. So be sure to subscribe, and everything I learn, I'm going to share it with you guys. So in October of 2019 is when I officially started my LLC, Magic City Media, with the hopes of being a major film production house. But I figured if that didn't work out, at the very least I can write off some of my freelance expenses. A few months before that, I had thrown an industry mixer with my old brand, Talking Shots. You should check it out. I get drunk and talk about anime. Where basically you show up, pay like $10, and it's open bar, and you get to share your work and promote yourself. There's where I ran into an old friend from high school, the director of this movie, Diane. Now, she had a script that she had wanted to shop around to some producers, and I had told her, look, if nobody buys the script in the next couple of months, I'll produce it. And sure enough, I ended up producing the movie. Now, we're two dumb kids in our early 20s, so shopping around a script isn't exactly easy, so it was kind of a perfect storm, if you will, to get this movie made. So around January is when we started the pre-production for the film. We had a script locked in, we had a budget set, and we were ready to start planning this thing. Now, Diane is an incredible director. She's very particular, which means that she knows what the film should kind of look and feel like well before we even start pre-pro. She presented me with color swabs, character write-ups, a ton of documentation so we could really dial in the movie we wanted to make, which really came in handy when we had to navigate this pandemic. Now, we knew early on, as with making any movie, that things rarely go as planned, but we really weren't ready for what the pandemic had in store. A little after we locked in all of the pre-pro documents, it was time to cast the movie. So we put an ad out on Backstage for video submissions, and we got a lot of them. Now, we didn't do the casting in person, one, because we didn't want to limit ourselves to 2 days, and we really didn't have a space of our own to host the casting anyway, and two, because we had already heard rumblings of a lockdown happening soon, so we figured this was the safest and most convenient option. This process took much longer than expected. We had to find local, non-SAG actors who could really have a solid chemistry and sell a couple falling out of love, and we had to do it entirely through Zoom. Ultimately, we ended up casting Crystal Millie, who's an amazing local actor and musician, and Joella Costa, who, funny enough, I actually co-starred with in a local production of Avenue Q. Look at that. Baby's all grown up now. So now with the movie cast and a rough idea of availability, we went on to hire crew. Now, obviously this is an independent production, so we don't have the money to spend on like a grip and lighting house. So essentially, we were the grip and lighting house, which tends to be the case with any independent film, is that you end up doing pretty much everything independently. It's kind of in the name. So we brought on Andrea, who was our director of cinematography. We brought on Leo, who is an amazing lighting designer who was basically our on-set lighting tech, and Jake, who did all of our audio for the movie. So we finally started to figure out a rough schedule when that fateful day in March came and the entire entertainment industry shut down. In a way, this was a blessing in disguise. One, because it opened up our schedules, and two, because it was a good way to make sure people had work over a 2-week pandemic. You know, the 2-week pandemic that didn't last a year. However, this is where we ran into our first major roadblock. So we were looking to rent a house to be our set for the movie. But of course, once the pandemic hit, nobody was renting, and those that were asking astronomical prices for them. This is where we really had to think like indie filmmakers, and we had a moment where I just kind of looked at Diane and said, hey, why don't we just use your house? This is where we knew this wasn't going to go exactly as planned. Diane was pretty bummed about that, but in hindsight, it was great because it saved us a ton of money that we used for an extra day of filming if we needed to use it. We lost some creative control, sure, but it bought us valuable time now that we're navigating this new post-normal environment. So we began to prep for our week of shooting. Andrea already had a Sony DSLR, I had a box light and a ring light, and Jake came in clutch with a zoom recorder, some wireless lavaliers, and a boom mic. The only piece of gear we actually had to rent was a 35mm lens and an adapter. Not the most luxurious setup by any means, but it made us use our lighting and shot composition much more creatively, and a lot of the shots in the film came out like that by complete accident. Like, for example, one of my favorite shots in the film is a shot where we have Crystal sitting in a bathtub crying. Now, this poor girl had to sit there and cry for 45 minutes, and like a champ, nailed the performance. Now, we didn't have a dolly on set. What we did have was a stack of books, a carpet, and really steady hands. Now, when it came to actually show up to set, safety was a major concern. And by this time, there was no real CDC guidelines aside from social distancing and masks wearing, and there was no industry-wide standard yet. There was no COVID compliance. So when we were writing up the contracts, I made it very clear that everyone had to agree to at least wear masks and maintain social distancing as best they could.
After a great start, Mike can't use gloves right now.
And of course, the first day of the shoot, Diane and I showed up like 2 hours early and sanitized the entire house and made sure everyone had access to hand sanitizer and tissues and all that stuff. We also made sure everybody was quarantining as best as possible and would alert us if they had any symptoms immediately, which thankfully no one did. For the most part, shooting at her place was pretty smooth sailing. That's really because we had control over the set, if you will. But things got a lot different once we had to shoot on location. We were able to rent the Black Box Theater at Miami Theater Center, which huge thank you to Art for that one. And we had a giant white wall, a fog machine, and a projector to play with. But all that smooth sailing would go out the window the following day. Now, part of pre-pro for Diane and I was basically driving all over Miami location scouting. And we knew going into this that this would be very guerrilla. We would have to be in and out as fast as possible, and this being Miami in the summertime, we knew everything would be packed, and we knew it would be very, very hot.
We're outside, how you feel?
Hot. Now, Karen and I scouted a ton of locations, and it's a good thing we did because the pandemic would quickly wipe out half of our options. For one, we wanted a shot driving down the tunnel that leads to the shipping port on Miami Beach. It's very pretty at night, lights are cool, would have been a great shot, but of course, during the pandemic, they closed the ports. This in particular was a bummer because we spent a lot of time researching how to shoot cars in motion and how to shoot from one car to another. The car scene didn't go to waste though, because eventually we turned that into a cruise scene going through Vizcaya, Brickell, Biscayne, all of that. And thank God we have a beautiful skyline. Another shot that turned out to be really difficult was anything involving the beach. So as it turns out, in Miami, people completely ignored the fact that there was a virus and showed up to the beach in droves. Thankfully, Ocean Drive was closed to all but foot traffic, so keeping your distance is pretty easy, and there's a lot of low-key spots where you can shoot in and out really quickly on South Beach. But the real nightmare happened when we had to go to Key Biscayne. Key Biscayne was packed, and this was the first time that we really had to slow down production. But thankfully, that extra time came in handy. We intended to shoot an entire scene that day, but unfortunately that couldn't happen. Thankfully though, we were able to find a nice quiet spot away from everybody that gave you a beautiful view of Miami skyline. Filmmaking is already stressful, but add to that the fact that you have to stay 6 feet away from other human beings, have to be incredibly low-key when filming on location because people see a camera and feel the need to stop, hang around, and ask questions, all in 90+ degree weather. Sweaty. And you have not met stress. Of course, it wouldn't be indie filmmaking if we didn't include some kind of jank. So the last day of shooting, of course, we're on South Beach at night. We met up in a parking garage, and the last of the ADR was recorded in the back of Jake's car. It's amazing what you can do with a little bit of ingenuity, which leads me to the takeaway from all this. The biggest lesson I learned from making this movie is that no amount of gear, no amount of money will ever replace good planning and being able to think on your feet in creative ways. Thankfully, we all had experience in live theater, so thinking on our feet kind of came naturally. As a producer, it was my job to make sure that the movie got done, and moreover, that everybody was safe. And it was an investment on my part, but it's one that I am so glad that I made. I couldn't have chosen better people to work with during a really stressful time on one of the weirdest projects I think I've done to date. Now, the movie's not done yet. We're still in post-production and we're still buttoning up some things, but we're almost there. It'll come out, I promise. If you'd like to see it, you can support us on Patreon, and all of our backers get a chance to see it before anyone else does. And of course, if you support us on Patreon, it helps us to continue to do things like this. We also have a Discord where we just hang out, talk shop. It's a place for artists to just hang out, show their work, and collaborate with one another. If you like what we do, please consider hitting that subscribe button with the bell notification, because I'm going to be telling you everything that I learned on this amazing journey of starting a video production company. So whether we glow up and we become something amazing, or whether we crash and burn, you're going to see all of it. All the music in this video was done by my good friends over at Just Grow. Please go check out their YouTube channel, their Bandcamp, their Spotify. They do amazing work, and I always love shouting out my homies over in Chicago. As always, if you have any questions about filmmaking, starting a production company, or making your first movie, feel free to sound off in the comments down below. I read all of them, so I'd love to know what you thought about my insane process and answering any questions you may have about maybe making your own movie. Thank you guys so much for watching. Of course, be sure to check back for more. I'm your boy Mike Dangerous, and I'll see you next time.